Welcome to Magicians Only. Are you a magician? Should you be listening to this? It's all right. Welcome. We welcome everyone. If you love magic, if you love watching it, if you love reading about it, if you love gossiping about magic and magicians, if you love the history of it, and I'm telling you right now, it's a really messed up, checkered past. If you want to know what the future of magic holds, if you want to talk about presentation, tricks, secrets, all of it, this is the home for you. No holds barred in this discussion. I am Steve Valentine, your host. This is proudly sponsored by Magic on the Go, which is the place to go if you want to learn any kind of magic. Magic on the Go is a visual online encyclopedia of magic, covering everything from stage to close-up, cards to general magic, you name it, including huge deep dives into subjects like cards to pocket, palming, the egg bag, the magnetic cards, the diminishing cards, close-up card magic, full routines, a lot of which has been created by yours truly, Steve Valentine, or I've discovered secrets from the past that are being lost, and I have kind of worked on them, improved them, updated them, or just added little bits of business to make them better. Or, as someone said to me the other day, I just save the secrets, because that's what we need to do so that magic can move into the future and there can be, again, a visual online database of magic, an encyclopedia of visual magic for people to use as a reference when they want to perform, when they want to be creative, or if they just want to immerse themselves in the history and love of magic. So without any further ado, let's get going. Let's hit episode 1. I was in my kitchen, actually, when I came up with the idea of this. I've been working on Magic on the Go now for, since 2017, and we have now over, 900 videos on there, I think. So in doing that, one of the things that was necessary, considering that I was the only one doing the research, learning the tricks, finding the tricks, improving the tricks, filming the editing and putting it out, was it really became, for me, like a postgraduate course in magic. Like, I thought I knew a lot about magic in my 20s and 30s, and then I quit magic for a while. I'll tell you the story about that, why I quit magic in a little bit. But basically, I quit and I went cold turkey for a number of years, didn't pick up a deck of cards, and just focused on my acting career. And then when I felt my acting career was really up and going, what happened was magic called me back. I just kept finding myself being pulled into these arenas or talking to people involved in magic, or particularly in this case, for me anyway, filming in New Zealand and literally bumping into a guy from my childhood back in England who was responsible for part of my magic education as a kid. So, and that inspired me to get back into it. And when I did, it's an amazing thing. I've got to tell you, the subconscious, it really, it doesn't stop working for you. So when I decided to kind of get back into my close-up show, my stand-up show, I wanted to do it from a different, more theatrical actor's bent. But still, what was interesting was that the problems, the issues that I'd had with certain bits of material were solved. And the subconscious was like, well, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? And I think maybe some 10 extra years of life experience really helped. So here I am back. And then as I started to research for Magic on the Go, I came across all these amazing stories and gossip from the past and techniques that, because of the proliferation of single trick DVDs, but we don't even have those really anymore now. We just have single trick downloads. You can go pay $29.99 for a single move, right? In the old days, you could buy Bobos for like $8 and you've got all the coin magic that you need. In researching it, I realized there's such a rich history that people who don't have the time to read, or that's just not how they consume their media, they're missing out on so much. And so presentation and history and some of these gossipy stories from the past, I started recording them for Magic on the Go. We did a piece called Past Masters, which basically I would read something that was written by a fairly well-known magician. And often the piece that was written would be just as relevant today as it was when it was written like 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And, you just had to guess at the end of it who you thought wrote it. And then I would do armchair stories, again, where I would take a story from the past, from the magical past, and I would create something. I would sometimes do it to camera, sometimes just do it audio, but it would be kind of an exploration into that story, maybe with comments, aside comments. And I just really loved it. And people started telling me that they loved those podcasts. They love those kind of dives into the history and presentation and the characters of the past, and some of them not so far back. So what I thought I would do is I would amalgamate all of the stuff that we've already filmed and recorded on Magic on the Go, and add to it a ton of new content and call this Magicians Only. Now, just fair warning, we may be talking about the secrets of magic a little bit. I do feel that if you are listening to this and you've come this far, you probably know a little bit about magic. We will discuss the secrets of magic. We will, but the secrets of magic, understand, they're not just the tricks. They're not just the secrets. The secrets of magic is far, or the secret of magic is a far wider field than that. You've got the presentation. One of the great things about my 20s and 30s was I lived right by the Magic Castle in Hollywood, and I would go up there almost every night. It's a private club, for those who don't know. It's a private club for magicians, but the public is invited in. If you know a member, you can be invited in, and so there's all these showrooms, and people get to see 3 or 4 or 5 magicians in a night. And some of the greatest magicians I saw perform there, people like Al Goshman and some of the most famous. I would say some of the most famous, not necessarily some of the greatest. That was a lesson for me. But people like Al Goshman and Bruce Savon and Larry Jennings and Father Jim Blantz and Peter Pitt and Ron Wilson and Billy McComb, all these kind of maybe names that you've read about or heard from the past. And I realized that there was a huge difference between kind of what people wrote in magazines and books and how they would glorify these magicians to what you actually saw when you saw them perform. Some of them, like Larry Jennings, I mean, admittedly, full disclosure, Larry was kind of a dick to me, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But he was, and he was a brilliant inventor and creator, but he was a dick to me, and he was a dick to a lot of people. And unfortunately, that part of that has become his legacy. You can't take away the fact that he invented some incredible close-up magic and sleight of hand. You don't have to like the creator. As a performer, he wasn't very good. And there are another number of other people like that. Well, I'll tell you what. Anyway, the point was, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'll tell you, the point was I often got to see in 1 week 2 magicians or 3 magicians, quite often when they weren't doing a proper check, doing the same trick. Maybe in the parlor of prestidigitation, somebody would do the silk to egg trick. That's a trick where you take a handkerchief and you transform it into an egg. And then what you do is you show the egg on the back of the egg, and there's a hole. You show it's a plastic egg, and there's a hole in the back of the egg, and that's where you stuff the hanky. And just when everybody thinks that they know how the trick is done, guess what? Boom, you crack the egg on the side of a glass. It's a real egg. Gotcha. I would see 2 or 3 people do the same trick and realize that no magician is created equal. It's not the trick, it's how you do it. And so when we talk about the secrets of magic, like I saw so many people do that trick. Some absolutely kill because they had just the right timing, and others absolutely butcher it. And so, we're going to be talking about all of these things. I remember, I'll tell you what happened with Larry Jennings. We'll start off with a bit of gossip. Why not? I was in my 20s, early 20s. I moved to LA in 1989, and we rented a little apartment about half a block away, 1737 North Orange Drive. And I remember the Hollywood and Highland hadn't been built yet. The Galaxy movie theaters hadn't been built yet. And there it was, by complete fluke, by the way. It was the first apartment complex. I just jumped on a plane and decided to go to Hollywood and see if we could make it work. Got in on a holiday visa, and we managed to rent an apartment because it was managed, the apartment complex was managed by a British couple, Norris and Joan. And I talk about it in my one-man show, but basically they, even though I had no job, I had a little bit of money, but no job, no credit at all. I didn't even know what that was at the time. Even though that was the case, because I was from the old country, they decided to take a risk and let me rent the apartment. Again, first one that I had been to. And then I remember Norris asking me how I was going to make a living. And I said, well, I'm planning actually to break into film and television as an actor. And I remember his face, his eyes went blank. And then he said, but how are you going to make a living? And I said, well, I'm going to make money being a magician, which he thought was even crazier. And I said, there's a place I've heard of called the Magic Castle. I know it's somewhere in California. I just need to find it. Maybe I can get a job there. I don't know. And Norris pulled me out onto the street and he said, this is 1737 North Orange Drive. And you see that building at the end of the street? That, my friend, is the Magic Castle. And yeah, you're right here. It was a bizarre moment. And I felt like it was something that was meant to be. I remember going up there, just walking in on a Friday lunch, and Billy McComb, a very famous old magician who I'd read all of his articles and books when I was a kid, he was in the lobby, and that was kind of like meeting like a magic star, really, for me. And he was great old magician. He used to say, he lived into his 80s. It was even when he was really old, he'd walk on stage and he would say things like, I'm going to get through this pretty quickly because it's pudding night at the home. Or he would say, I'm smoking a cigarette. I'm only smoking because I don't want to die of nothing. Right? It's great lines. Anyway, so he was there and he was lovely and he welcomed me to the club. He said, come on, dear boy, I'll show you around. He showed me around. He signed my membership application. And then I auditioned to be a member. And when you audition to be a member, you have to perform for a room full of magicians in the close-up room at the time. When you audition to work, not to be a member, when you audition to work there. And so I didn't know what everyone would want to see. So I crammed it all into everything I knew into like 25 minutes. And I don't know how many, 30, 40 tricks. And it was just nuts looking back. But that kind of became my style in a way. I think that just was how I've always performed magic, is I like to kind of beat people up with it, until they just submit that magic is real and have a good time. I remember I was working in the close-up room, and the show was really fast-paced and a lot of gags, a lot of bits of business, but a lot of magic. And Di Vernon, the professor, was in the audience. Now, just an aside about who Di Vernon is. Di is known as the professor, and he is really the father of modern natural close-up magic. He knew Houdini back in the past. He's famous for being one of the few people that fooled Houdini with a card trick, although to be honest, from what we read about Houdini these days, it wasn't that hard to fool him. It was just hard to get him to admit he was fooled. But Di Vernon, he fooled Houdini, and that kind of served him well. That little bit of gossip served him well for years. So he moved to California to live at the Magic Castle, which was a brilliant marketing move on behalf of Milt and Bill Larson, who were the owners, because they knew that magicians would travel from around the world to kind of learn at his feet, which is exactly what happened. Di had two students, main students, who were famous students, who were Bruce Savon and Larry Jennings, all great creators of magic. And he would push them to create better moves, better tricks, and he would pit them against each other. It was honestly kind of a bullshit thing to do, but very dysfunctional. But yeah, he would make each of them jealous of each other's work. But in the end, they ended up creating some pretty amazing material. So if Di Vernon, the other thing about Di Vernon was he was incredibly brutally honest. And when I met him, I guess he was in his 80s at that point, maybe. And it was known, he was always known as a straight shooter. So if you did a trick and it sucked or you flashed, he would tell you in no uncertain terms. Sometimes he might even say, don't give up your day job, or oh, that was awful. Yeah, what are you doing? You shouldn't be allowed to handle a deck of cards. And I think we need that kind of brutal honesty today, quite honestly, because I'll see videos on Facebook of magicians doing a piece, and they're like, oh, here's a piece I've been working on. And not only does it suck, but they flash, the presentation is bad, the slides are stiff, it's nothing magical about it at all. And yet the comments underneath are, wonderful, great job, really enjoyed that, good for you. And that kind of overly effusive, let's be nice criticism, we don't want to offend anybody, that doesn't help anyone get better. Anyway, that's an aside. So in the days of Vernon, you didn't want to get on his bad side. And most importantly, you didn't really want him to come into your show because, well, he was famous for speaking out loud in the middle of your show. Oh my God, that's awful. Or worse, he would fall asleep and often fart. So I wish I was making this shit up. So imagine, I'm a young neophyte. I've got a whole new act, and I'm working it. It's going down really well. And Vernon comes into the show. They tell me that Di Vernon's in the audience, and I'm shitting my pants now. I'm like, I don't know what. Oh hell, what am I going to do? And I go out there, and I must have. All I can remember is just plowing through even more material. I'm thinking like, then one of these things must impress him. But the audience was rocking, and there was a lot of interplay with the audience. And at that point, I'd come from working the working men's clubs and cruise ships. And in England, the working men's clubs are pretty can be kind of a, I don't know, like a rough performance venue, but it's a place where you really learn the ropes, because the audiences, who are all kind of blue collar workers, car workers, steel workers, they even, how can I explain this? They basically have a club that they go to where they get free beer and free entertainment at the time. And so they are aficionados of variety. And therefore, if you suck, or if you have a show that everyone else is doing, or if you're weak, or if you're nervous, they will jump on you and devour you like hyenas. And they're famous for heckling. Obviously, it's England, so that's an art form in itself. And so I was used to working off a crowd. So Vernon comes in anyway. So this is where I came from. Vernon comes in, and he's watching the show. And I do remember, and I'm not saying this for any of my own self-gratification, but I remember he had a smile on his face. At the end of it, he came up to me. Everybody left, and he was still sitting there. And then he came up to me and he said, very, very good, young man. Very, very good, very good. Enjoyed it. Let me show you something. And he just grabbed a deck of cards and gave me a couple of tips. And it was lovely. And then he left the room. Well, my ex-wife, she decided to follow him and see what he was going to say to other people. And she followed Di, and he went outside of the close-up room, and he went up the stairs to what's known as the Owl Bar, which is a small little alcove on the second floor. It's a beautiful bar. The backdrop is the original backdrop from Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. It's pretty great. And of course, there's all these owls, which is the symbol of the castle, is the magical owl. And so apparently Vernon went up to, she overheard this, Vernon went up to Larry and said, now you see, there's a young man in the close-up room. You need to go see that show, Larry. That's how you do a close-up show. Well, I don't think Larry liked that. And so from then on, he wasn't particularly nice to me. He came in to see my show later in the week and then tried to tell me how to lay down a deck of cards, and it was clearly because he felt he needed to tell me something. Anyway, so that's my Vernon story, Jennings story. So because I was at the castle, I saw all these magicians, and you soak it up. The more you watch, the more you soak up. And I realize that it's not about how you do the trick, it's about how you do the trick. And we're going to discuss a lot of that here on Magicians Only. I'm a huge fan of a magician from the 1920s called Oswald Williams. And when I was working on my one-man show, Life and Other Deceptions, and then later on, I was enlarging upon a certain routine for another show called Mr. Valentine Blows Your Mind. I wanted to take one of his conceptions. Now, Oswald Williams was a magician who worked in London, and they had with David Devant. There was a St. George's Hall. There was it basically was a building that had a number of theatres in it, and they had an ongoing magic show in London, and it's famous in the history of magic for just being a place where new illusions and original tricks were continually being invented and presented to the public. Every single trick that Oswald Williams did was original. And he rarely sold actually anything that he invented. The only time he did sell it was when it got ripped off, which will be an ongoing theme within this podcast, talking about how tricks get ripped off by other magicians. And it's been going on for centuries, and it's still going on in different forms. But so sometimes Oswald would have to put it out in order to get the credit. I was working on a routine of his called the Repeat Vanishing Silk, which is one of the first tricks to ever be created that had this patter line about a vanishing silk, right? Which is, I saw a magician do this trick and I thought it was amazing. And then I said, that trick you did, and you repeat the trick, that trick you did, whether it's counting cards or in this case, it was vanishing a handkerchief. I saw him vanish the handkerchief. Oh, that was amazing. What, said my friend? Well, the trick where he took a handkerchief and he made it disappear in his hand, and you do it again. And then so I've got to really know how that works. So I went backstage and I kicked open the door and I was like, that trick you did where you stuff the handkerchief into your hand and make it disappear? You do it again. And the magician says, what, you mean the one where I take a handkerchief and shove it in my hand and make it disappear? And I was like, yeah, the one where you take a handkerchief, shove it in your hand, and you just keep repeating the trick. And at the end of it, the secret turns out to be a lemon, which is kind of the punchline of the whole thing, where you push the handkerchief into your hand and it changes into a lemon. Actually, the line is like, but what is the answer? What is the secret? What is the answer? And the magician said, well, the answer is a lemon. And he produces the lemon. This, by the way, was a punchline that Peter Warlock, another famous magician, gave Oswald Williams because Ozzy didn't have a finale for it back in the day. Anyway, Oswald Williams, one of my great magic heroes. I'm going to tell you a story about a visit that I made to Davenport's in England in the next episode. It has to do with Ozzy Williams. One of his most famous tricks was the red and green box, where he had a red box and a green handkerchief. And he put the green handkerchief in the red box, he threw it in the air, and then suddenly it was a green box with a red handkerchief. Incredibly visual, incredibly fast, with a nice little patter theme. And it's a trick that no one has seen since Oswald Williams died, because he made one. And then when he died, Davenport's Magic Company bought his estate, and they have owned that trick since then. And it only recently was it taken out of vaults, and I managed to see it. It's a great, great trick. So there was an article written about Oswald, by Verrill Wass in the Sphinx magazine, and unusual for a magic magazine, because usually when you read reports and biographies of magicians, they kind of put the crap aside and they just say all the lovely things. They make these magicians sound like complete geniuses, like no one could ever possibly come close to their talent. And what's wonderful about this biography, is that Verrill kind of talks a little bit, he's very, very honest about Oswald Williams, about his strengths and his flaws, and I think it's wonderful. So today we are, and this will give you an idea of sometimes how we're going to do things on this podcast. Today I am going to perform or read or demonstrate or give you this article written by Verrill Wass on one of my magic heroes, Oswald Williams. And I think by the end of this, you will understand why I love this guy so much. Again, written by Verrill Wass, who was a rather prolific writer of magic books and secrets in his day, very original. And if you listen to this and then go read some of his books, you'll see that no matter what he says, he was incredibly influenced by the work of Ozzy Williams, including the red and green box. The red and green box, by the way, was a trick that was talked about. I don't know if it was talked about the audience, if regular people talked about it a lot, but certainly magicians of the day. Max Holden said it was one of the greatest things he'd ever seen. The prop, I saw it, and it is a genius method. But the presentation was really simple. It was, ladies and gentlemen, seeing is believing. I have here a green box and a red handkerchief. Am I putting the red handkerchief into the green box, or he would toss the box up in the air and it would come down? The box would come down red, or do I have a red box with a green handkerchief inside? And that was it, really. That was the piece. It was a nanosecond, but what a technical masterpiece of machinery. So here we go, Ozzy Williams by Verrill Wass. In biography, it's easy to either canonize the dead or consign them to a literary hell, to make a printer's devil's holiday, as they say. Whether the destination of the biographer's subject is heaven or hell often depends not on the deceased's character, but on the hate or love of the biographer. Fortunately, such printed heavens and hells can be repulped and do not affect the subject's ultimate destination, the bourne from which no traveller returns, to misquote Shakespeare. In this article, I devoted a great deal to the less positive side of Oswald Williams's character. So doing, I may have been unjust, having seen faults in him as in a mirror reflecting only faults in myself. At first, I had intended it to be a simple catalogue of his effects, just stitched together with praise. But this, I have found, is not enough. He was too fine a magician and a man to be allowed to appear as a faultless dummy. However, this article also will go fully into what he accomplished. Of his writings, there is little to be said, for he wrote a little, save for the moves, stage directions, and patter of the effects he invented. At his death, these only existed in manuscript, though one day they may appear in a printed book. For he early learnt what I shall probably never learn, that it is far more profitable to present one's own inventions before audiences than to impart their secrets to fellow magicians. For to do the latter is to give them away in both the magical and monetary sense of the term. All these manuscripts are eloquent witnesses to his great attention to detail, which was never better exemplified in practice than in the performances of The Dizzy Limit. For whether it was presented by Jasper Maskelyne, Robert Harbin, or himself, every detail of presentation and the split-second timing was precisely the same. Only the performer varied. The performance did not. Quick aside by Steve. So as we do these readings, every now and then I'll have a little thing to say. I'll have something to say. I always do. And so this little sound will pop up, and that will tell you that it's popping over to me to speak as Steve before you hear this sound, which will then take us back to the written piece. All right. I just want to say The Dizzy Limit is an amazing piece, and you can see it on YouTube. David Nixon performs it. The trick is this. There is a large white net that is hanging from the top of the stage, and the assistant is wrapped in it. That is put in the net. The net is folded in half, and then it's lifted up like a giant net hammock. And then the magician fires a gun, and as he fires the gun, the net drops open, and the dress that the assistant was wearing falls to the ground, but she has gone, and the rest is left to your imagination. It's a wonderful, incredibly visual piece of magic. David Nixon does it twice on his TV specials. British magician who I loved growing up. Basically, Oswald would write out the patter for it, the timing, the lights, the music, and it had to be done exactly the way he did it. So when he brought in other magicians like Robert Harbin or Jasper Maskelyne to present it instead of him, they had to do it to that exact rhythmical beat in order for the thing to hit hard. And so that's what they're talking about. Anyway, let's go back to the article. Though he wrote little, he did produce one booklet titled, and I speak from memory, Hints to Young Conjurers, full of that sound common sense, which being so obviously, unfortunately begins to sound like platitude, and the young cannot abide platitudes, even if they are not those of Apollonius. By the way, I just want to let you know that we have that booklet, Hints to Young Conjurers. I have it, and it is available for free as part of the notes on this particular episode. All right, back to Verrill. Yet this almost forgotten booklet's title conveyed his sympathy for the young and aspiring magician, and no one was more practical than he in showing this sympathy. Many a young conjurer received his first chance at Maskelyne's, and in one program, the whole of the second half was devoted to combined operations by a corps of young conjurers. Among the many youngsters who appeared at Maskelyne's, all owing more or less to his help, but all owing something, was first and foremost Robert Harbin, who changed his name from Ned Williams so that Ozzy should not be given a son who was not his. Robert Harbin eventually took over Oswald Williams' part in all the programs, and towards the end, Jasper Maskelyne gone and Ozzy a sick man, Harbin bore most of the show on his young shoulders. He would be the first to admit how much he learnt from his mentor. The names of the others who appeared there are too numerous to mention, but included were Wilfred Allen, Richard Barnes, Howard de Courcy, Rupert Howard, Norman Hunter, the inimitable, and many, many more. Lewis Davenport and Company, having already bought the rights to use the words Maskelyne's Mysteries and already in possession of the effects of Louis Nicola, one of Maskelyne's top-line performers upon his death, who had been to Maskelyne's what David Devant had been before him, when the St. George's Hall had been affectionately known as Maskelyne and Devant. Curiously enough, it never became Maskelyne and Williams in the public mind, though the transition from Maskelyne and Cook to Maskelyne and Devant had been readily made by the public. Reason for this was probably twofold. Cook had been somewhat of a non-entity anyway, so the lovable genius Devant did not have to fight him for the affections of the public, whereas Williams, Oswald Williams, had to attempt the well-nigh impossible of replacing Devant in the minds of the public. Further, Oswald Williams was at a disadvantage in this, for he had not the lovable, intimate stage personality of Devant. He was saturnine, just a little sarcastic, and conveyed the impression, maybe the wrong one, that he considered himself cleverer than his audience. This Devant never did, always seeming to be as amazed at his magic as the audience he was entertaining. That is one reason, but it's not, I believe, reason enough. It's been said that Oswald Williams was not a good stage name, whereas David Devant, with alliteration's artful aid of the double D and V sound, was. Yet, despite Williams not being a good stage name, Emlyn Williams, the Welsh dramatist, has succeeded with the same surname, though maybe Emlyn is a more romantic name than Oswald. For the real reason, we shall have to look still further, and the real reason is to be found in the statement that Oswald Williams was too much of an artist. Too much of an artist? This phrase needs elucidating. Perhaps it would be truer to say that too often Ozzy conjured for conjurers, which wouldn't have mattered so much if there had been more of them to conjure to. One reason of this was that all too often Ozzy's effects were made into almost novel length by his patter and presentation, when there was only enough magical material for a very short story. In other words, as George Robey would say, quite a lot of time passed without anything very magical happening. That's really funny because it reminds me of a conversation I had with a development executive at Sci-Fi Network who, when I was trying to pitch him a magic show, he said, "No, I don't think magic is right for television." And I was like, "Why?" And he said, "Honestly," he said, "because it's procedure. Nothing happens for a long period of time. And then at the end of it, maybe something magical happens, or maybe it's a little bit disappointing. And then we know we have to sit through all this crap before we get to something else magical." That was his opinion of magic in general for television. I can't say he's wrong. Indeed, while he used almost no patter at all for his illusions, he used too much for many of the smaller effects, which would have been better as mere magical asides. Probably he did this in the mistaken belief that by doing so he was building them up into big effects. Yet too often, though frequently he was successful, it did not work out that way. Another reason was that stress was often laid on the how things happened rather than on what happened. And this I thought to be the case with the invisible wine trick, for example, which was an undeniably clever production of a bottle and a glass of wine, but the time taken in producing them seemed to me to be too long. If one is one's own producer, it's a danger difficult to avoid, a trap easy to fall into, of confusing what the audience will like with what one likes oneself. Oswald Williams was his own producer. One might also say that behind the scenes he was, on the performance side of the business, Maskelyne's, the law, and also the judge of whether or not the law was being fulfilled. So it's not to be wondered at that with the judge also being the lawmaker, sometimes his judgment was not impartial, and the laws he passed were sometimes those he liked and not always for the good of the community, that is, the audiences of whom he should have been the servant. But maybe this is to do him an injustice, for I believe magic itself was the only servant he really acknowledged. This was manifested by the fact that at his flat he had a well-equipped workshop in which he would work in any spare time he had on the creation of new mysteries. He was, if anything, happier in the workshop than he was before an audience. His performance were only an ultimate proof of his success in creating new effects, complete to the smallest detail in his workmanship, patter, and presentation. That he was happiest in the workshop may, towards the end of his life, have been due to the fact that for some years he had not been well. Public performances entail a great amount of nervous strain, and so it was fortunate for him that allied to this strain was not that of touring, as he had done in his earlier years. That Masculines did not adapt itself to modern conditions cannot be charged to him. He had many warring factions to contend with, many of which were drawing money from the business while putting no ideas in, and that was why Jasper Masculine left. Final reason why Oswald Williams did not replace Devant in the public mind was that Williams, unlike Devant, had talkies, radio, and television to contend with, and Masculine's audiences were dwindling because instead of being one step ahead of the times, Masculine's refusing to quicken its pace became a step or two behind. The need for speed was realized in Hello Masculines, which was the name of a show, but speed was not persisted in. And so, although it said the race is not always to be swift, this time it was, and Masculines persisted. One man alone, even had he not been sick, could not have saved it. But let's turn to look at some of Oswald Williams's effects, which are probably his most permanent memorial. I love this article so much because it takes somebody who is a legend in magic, who has been talked about as a legend in magic, and makes him human. All of the things that we go through as performers and as human beings, the insecurity, maybe focusing on the art too much, health issues, politics, all of it it's so human. I love, and it's all in this article, which is so rare. I think this is a good place to stop right now. We're about halfway through the actual article by Verrill Wass. He's about to get into talking about the actual tricks that Ozzy invented and performed and what was good and what was bad about them. And this is a fascinating part of this entire article. I can't wait to get into it with you. But we're at the end of our time, so I think it's a great cliffhanger, isn't it? Especially for you magicians who just want to know the tricks. This is going to be great. Come back to the next episode. Come back to episode 2 of Magicians Only. We'll get into this part. We'll talk about the magic tricks. I've got some other anecdotes, some really great stuff. Also, I found a recording of Oswald Williams performing a trick, and I think it's really interesting to hear. So that will be in the next episode. Don't forget to check out the show notes. In this episode, I have a little booklet called Hints for Young Conjurers, written by Oswald Williams, that has some lovely advice in it. But don't forget, it is a document of its time, and I think it's well worth a read. We may even discuss it in more detail in another episode. And if you're really interested in the work of Ozzy Williams, I do want to let you know that there's a whole masterclass on Magic on the Go on the repeat vanishing handkerchief, which is a plot trick that he invented. It was so popular that other magicians created their own methods, and Oswald kept his method tight and to himself until someone started selling it, and then he had to come out and produce a couple of versions of his own. I've talked about this with Roy Davenport at Davenport's on my visit. I've seen the original gimmick that Oswald used to vanish the handkerchief. It's really clever. Slightly different from anything else that's been out there on the market. And I talk about this in Magic on the Go. There's a whole masterclass on all these different methods of doing silk vanishes. And we're going to be adding more to it. So if you're a member of Magic on the Go, go check it out. It's just one of over 900 videos that are on there, but I think it's important to record. I even have what I call my master silk vanish, which is something that I came up with. It's really well worth checking out, Magic on the Go, which is interesting because Magicians Only is sponsored by Magic on the Go, an encyclopedia of magic in your pocket. You can take it with you on your phone wherever you go. If you want to listen to some of the podcasts, watch some of the interviews, learn some magic, it's right there on your phone with you wherever you are. I actually use it quite often because I'm getting older, and sometimes I forget a routine or a sequence, and I can't tell you, and I swear this is the truth, how many times I've gone onto my own site to relearn a trick that I couldn't remember. It's embarrassingly often. And also, I've been adding effects lately that are works in progress, and you can see how a trick starts, how you can add to it, create patter. I have live performances, some good, some work, some didn't. But the whole purpose of Magic on the Go is to really immerse ourselves in the world of magic and learn as much as we can from all these different angles, even if you don't think you'll use that particular skill, because you never know. The world throws all kinds of curveballs your way, and you want to be able to catch that curveball as a magician and make it disappear. And that's what Magic on the Go does for you. It makes curveballs disappear. Anyway, check it out, Magic on the Go, magiconthego.com. As always, I will see you next week on the inside.